Picture this. You are kneeling in the sand just before dawn, your knees pressed into stone tiles still warm from the night, incense coiling through the air like the breath of forgotten gods, the scent thick and heavy, lotus, myrrh, and something bitter beneath it, something metallic, like the taste of blood on the back of the tongue. You are a priest of Amun, your skin painted with ochre, your arms stiff with ritual bracelets, and you are preparing to wed a king who still does not know how to rule, who has only just learned to write his name in the divine script. Behind you, the halls of the temple open into darkness, and ahead, beyond the pillars, beyond the lines of barefoot acolytes, beyond the shrine of gilded vultures and stone lions, the boy is waiting. He is 12 years old. The girl beside him, his bride, is 14, and she is his sister. The robes they wear are too large for them, the linen too stiff, the collars too heavy with turquoise and electrum. Their faces are painted in the style of gods, gold dust around their eyes, lines drawn to extend their gaze into eternity. But nothing can disguise the fact that their hands are trembling. They do not look at each other. They do not speak. They are wax figures placed before the altar, offerings to the dynasty that raised them and the empire that is slowly, quietly, beginning to rot beneath the weight of its own divinity. This is Thebes, 1332 BCE. The Nile is high, the land is restless. The gods are watching, and the bloodline of Pharaoh has begun to collapse in on itself. Tutankhaten is his name. For now, a name carved from the failing dream of his father, Akhenaten, the heretic king who dared to ban the old gods, who stripped Egypt of Amun and built a golden prison around Aten, the sun disk that saw all and answered to no one. His father ruled like a prophet and died like a curse, leaving behind a court in ruin, priests burning for vengeance, generals clutching at stolen power, and children, so many children, scattered like dice across the throne room tiles. Tutankhaten is one of them. A child born into a broken dynasty, the last usable vessel of a line so obsessed with purity that it has begun to breed its own sickness. His mother is unknown. His father is likely also his grandfather. His blood is sacred, yes, but sacred like venom, sacred like a plague sealed inside a jar too beautiful to shatter. And now, to preserve the dynasty, to stitch the unraveling tapestry of empire back together, they will marry him to his sister, Ankhesenamun, daughter of Nefertiti, child of the heretic queen, survivor of a court that drowned its enemies in honeyed wine and whispered prayers. She has seen too much already. She has watched sisters disappear into silence. She has walked the halls of palaces that echo with chants no one dares translate. She knows what this wedding is. It is not a union. It is a containment. The priests know it too. They dress it in ritual, cloak it in the language of gods and order and fate. But underneath the chants and incense, there is fear. The kind of fear that clings to ancient empires when they realize they are dying. Egypt has been here before. Droughts, invasions, collapses, but never like this. Never with the gods themselves being rewritten. Never with the royal blood so dangerously entangled. The boy stands still. He has learned to do that. He has been taught how to breathe like a pharaoh, slowly, with the chest, not the stomach. He has been taught how to hold the crook and flail, though they are too large for his hands. He has memorized the names of ancestors whose tombs have already been looted, and he has practiced the divine names that he will assume when he ascends the throne. He has not been taught what it means to be a husband. He has not been taught how to touch a woman, and certainly not a sister. The ceremony moves forward with the precision of sacrifice. Ankhesenamun kneels. Tutankhaten lifts the ceremonial oil to her brow. They do not speak. The high priest chants words older than the pyramids. The air grows heavier with smoke. Somewhere behind the altar, an ox is slaughtered, its blood pooled into a silver basin, and the sound of its death is muffled by the drums. They are bound not with rope, but with titles. Queen Consort, God's wife of Amun, Royal Daughter, Great Royal Husband. Their bodies have not yet ripened into adulthood, but their names stretch back thousands of years, linking them to Ra, to Osiris, to Mayat. They are not expected to love each other. They are expected to preserve something older than themselves, something more important than themselves. The dynasty, the illusion of order, the bloodline. When the rite ends, they are led to the chamber set aside for them. A chamber designed not for comfort, but for conception. The bed is carved from ebony and ivory. The walls are painted with scenes of gods coupling in divine ecstasy. Lotus petals have been scattered across the floor. Servants withdraw without meeting their eyes. The door closes. No one speaks of what happens next. No records exist, no murals, no poems, only the silence of stone and the knowledge that soon, very soon, Tutankhaten will change his name. Not to honor his bride, but to renounce his father, to erase the heresy, to become a puppet of the old gods, a boy made king by men who intend to rule through him, to wear the crown as both shackle and mask. He will be called Tutankhamen, and he will never know what it means to belong to himself. The sand outside the palace is not the same as the sand beyond the city. Here it is swept, blessed, pressed under feet gilded with ointment and kohl, patterned with sandals that have never felt the river's mud. Within these carefully controlled courtyards, time holds its breath, suspended in the thrum of priestly chants and the measured drip of sacred oils. And in this embalmed silence, under a sky too blue to be comforting, the boy who will become a god begins the slow transformation from sun to symbol. Tutankhaten is no longer his name. That name belongs to the corpse of a dream, to the brittle bones of Akhenaten's golden city, Amarna, now abandoned to vultures and ghosts. The court has stripped him of the name as they stripped the walls of Atene's temples, as they deface the faces of his father and mother from monuments that once declared them eternal. He is not the child of Aten now. He is the child of Amun. The priests have made this clear. They have anointed him. They have renamed him. They have surrounded him with men who smile with teeth that glint like obsidian and eyes that never leave his every movement. And so he becomes Tutankhamun. He does not understand the full weight of the name, but he carries it nonetheless. Shoulders stooped beneath collars of lapis and jasper, bones still soft with adolescence and aching from the strain of divine expectation. He has been taught the posture of kings, but not yet the certainty. When he speaks, his voice trembles, cracking under its own youth, and the courtiers smile politely, as if the wind has spoken instead. Ankhesenamun walks beside him, but they do not speak, unless others command it. Their marriage is not a partnership, it is a ritual, reenacted daily. She sits beside him during ceremonies, her face painted to conceal the weariness that pools beneath her eyes. She is older, but not by much, and yet there is something ancient in the way she carries herself, like a child who has already buried too many siblings, too many truths. She has been taught to keep her voice low and her spine straight, to nod when spoken to and to disappear when not needed. And yet, in quiet moments, when the court retreats and only the pillars remain, she sometimes turns to the boy beside her, not as a queen to a king, not as sister to brother, but as one prisoner to another. And he sees, just briefly, the flicker of someone who once dreamed of being more than royal. Their days are filled with performance. The palace is a theatre of gold and incense, where every gesture is an offering and every breath a recitation. Priests guide them through rites they barely comprehend. Generals parade before them with trophies of distant skirmishes, and sculptors carve their likenesses into temples that will outlive their bodies by millennia. They are shown chests filled with offerings from the people, grain, amulets, letters begging for mercy or healing or favor. But the people do not truly know them. They are not seen as children. They are seen as gods, and gods do not cry. But Tutankhamun does. At night, when the walls are still and the air presses hot against his skin, he cries into the silence, pressing his face into embroidered pillows that smell of lotus and sweat, afraid that someone will hear him and more afraid that no one will. His legs ache, his spine burns, his mouth is often dry, his breath shallow, his limbs twisted in ways that make walking a punishment. The physicians come, applying ointments and whispering prayers, but they do not tell him what he already suspects, that his bones are not like other boys, that his blood carries not only divinity, but disease, that the same purity the priests exalt has left him malformed, brittle, doomed. They call him beautiful in public, tall for his age, regal, divine, but he knows they lie. He sees the way they look past him. He feels the stiffness in his joints, the pain in his knees, the way his foot drags slightly on the floor when he walks. He watches the courtiers flinch when he stumbles. He feels the way their hands tighten around his elbows, their voices strained with forced reverence as they help him stand again. He hears their sighs behind closed doors, and yet the ceremonies continue. He is led into temples, dressed in leopard skins, crowned with uri that press against his brow like thorns. He swings censers heavy with resin. He recites the hymns that praise Amun, that thank the gods for restoring balance after the heresy of his father. They teach him to curse his own bloodline. They teach him to smile while doing it. The court praises his piety. They say the gods have forgiven Egypt through his birth. They call his union with Ankhesenamun sacred, blessed, the renewal of the royal house. But beneath the alabaster pillars and the ivory figurines, the truth festers like a wound. The throne has swallowed another child, and the gods have offered nothing in return. Tutankhamun is not stupid. He listens, he watches, he understands more than they think he does. He knows that the General Horemheb watches him with the patience of a lion, that the old vizier, bows too low and speaks too softly, that his every word is memorized, his every blink interpreted. He understands that his power is only real so long as he does not try to use it. The moment he begins to speak for himself, they will find new ways to silence him. And so he is careful. He signs the decrees they place before him. He nods when asked. He smiles when prompted. He does not protest when they take his toys away and replace them with scrolls and scepters. He does not flinch when they whisper about heirs. He does not ask why he wakes each morning with his chest tight and his joints swollen. And when Ankhesenamun is summoned to his chambers, he does not speak. He does not know what to say to her. Sometimes they sit in silence, close enough to touch, but separated by the years of ceremony and shadow that have buried their childhoods. Other times, she reads to him old stories of Horus and Set, of Isis weeping by the Nile, of gods who suffered and were reborn. Her voice is low and steady, and he listens not because he believes, but because her voice is the only sound in the palace that does not ask something of him. They do not speak of their marriage. They do not speak of the future, because they both know it has already been written, and they are not its authors. There is a particular kind of silence that hangs in a palace built by hands that never bled, an architectural hush, gilded and deliberate, where sound is not absent but suppressed, like breath held underwater. In this silence, beneath painted ceilings and linen-draped balconies, A boy king with a crooked spine is dressed for war. Not the kind fought with blades, but the kind fought with appearances, rituals, masks. Each morning begins the same way. He is bathed in scented oils, his limbs stretched and rubbed to ease the swelling in his knees, his hair oiled and braided into tight coils that glisten like obsidian under the sun's cruel gaze. He is 13 now, or nearly so, though it is difficult to tell beneath the layers of pigment and protocol. His body is growing, but not well. His face is narrowing, his ribs pressing more visibly against his chest, the deformities that once whispered now speaking louder with each passing month. The priests say nothing. The court physicians, some of the best minds in Egypt, apply new ointments and offer new prayers, but the truth slips through their fingers like river sand. His bones ache not from injury, but from inheritance. The line that once claimed descent from the gods has begun to devour itself. Still, the boy wears the crown. Still, he is led to the halls of Amun, flanked by men who smile as they speak for him. Still, the sculptors carve his face into stone, straight, symmetrical, unblemished, as if they can will perfection into existence through artistry alone. And still, beside him sits Ankhesenamun, whose beauty has begun to sharpen into something more dangerous. She no longer looks like a child, though the palace never let her be one. Her eyes have grown colder, not cruel, but careful, the way a blade is careful when it knows it can cut. She moves with the grace of someone who has learned, through repetition and loss, how to pass unseen through a court built to admire and destroy in equal measure. They are no longer whispered about as siblings. Now they are king and queen, and the court has begun to watch her womb. They do not ask if she is ready. They do not wonder if she consents. Her body, like his, is no longer her own. It belongs to Egypt, to the legacy of dynasties written in the language of bloodlines and gods. Every month that passes without an heir is counted behind closed doors, measured against calendars of rains and omens, discussed in tones too polite to be called suspicion. And so, when she begins to show signs, faint nausea, silence at meals, a hand resting longer on her belly than before, there is celebration. Quiet at first, a shift in posture, a gift of figs, a renewed offering to Hathor. But within days the rumors spread like oil across the Nile. The queen is with child, the bloodline will continue, the gods are pleased. Tutankhamun says nothing, not because he is indifferent, but because he does not understand what it means to be a father. His body barely functions as a man's. He does not feel desire, only pressure. The nights spent with Ankhesenamun are shrouded in duty, not intimacy. They touch out of ritual, not yearning. He is told that he is fertile, but even that is a lie stitched from desperation. The child that stirs inside his sister's womb may be his, or it may not be. No one will dare say otherwise, but for a brief moment the palace rejoices. A new statue is commissioned, Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun, hand in hand, with a child cradled between them. It is unfinished. It will remain unfinished. Because within weeks, the queen begins to bleed. It starts with cramps, sharp, sudden, folding her over during a temple procession. The priests say it is nothing, a test of divine patience. They increase her offerings. They feed her bread soaked in honey and pomegranate. They call for midwives, healers, women who speak in herbs and amulets. But the pain does not stop. It deepens. It twists through her like a viper, and in the shadows of her chamber, hidden behind linen curtains soaked in sweat and prayer, she loses the child. No one speaks of it publicly. The announcement of her pregnancy is retracted without fanfare. The statue is moved to a storeroom. The midwives are dismissed. The halls grow quieter, and Tutankhamun, who had been made to pray daily for a healthy heir, wakes to find his wife in bed, pale and trembling, her hands curled around nothing. He does not know how to comfort her. He sits beside her, says the words he was taught, that the gods will bless them again, that the cycle will begin anew, that Egypt's hopes still rest with them. But she does not respond. She does not weep. She only turns her face toward the wall, and the silence that falls between them is deeper than grief. It is resignation. The months that follow are marked by absence. Ankhesenamun withdraws from public life. She attends only the most necessary ceremonies. Her smile, once painted for the benefit of generals and priests, now flickers too faintly to be believed. She is spoken of with reverence, then with concern. Some say she is cursed, others say she is mourning. The truth is simpler, crueler. She is exhausted, exhausted from being a vessel, exhausted from being a sister, a queen, a symbol, exhausted from pretending that any of this was ever a choice. Tutankhamun ages in parallel, his body weakening beneath robes that grow heavier with every procession. His back curves more sharply now, his gait is halting. He leans on a staff not out of fashion, but necessity. The palace crafts for him a throne carved to support his deformed hips. He is painted taller in murals, more regal, more masculine, but beneath the paint, his bones ache. He feels the pressure building again. Another pregnancy must be attempted. The court needs an heir. The dynasty needs survival. But he hesitates. He sees the way Ankhesenamun flinches at the mention of future children. He sees the way her hand brushes her stomach when she thinks no one is watching. And for the first time, he wonders if it is worth it. If the gods they serve, the gods who demand bloodlines be folded back upon themselves, who demand siblings wed and wombs produce, who demand silence and obedience and sacrifice, are not gods at all, but mirrors of men sharpened by power and polished with cruelty. He is too young to speak this aloud, but he is old enough to see it, and it begins to haunt him. By the time his 14th year has passed, the palace walls no longer echo with praise, but with caution. Every footstep soft, every conversation low, as if speaking too loudly might break the boy's fragile body, or worse, awaken the truth no one is prepared to name. Tutankhamun is no longer simply watched, he is managed. His days are drawn in ink before he wakes, each hour carved into stone by handlers who speak with reverence and act with calculation. The boy king still wears the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, but it sits heavier on his skull now, pressing not just bone, but thought into the shape the court desires. His spine, increasingly curved, bows beneath the weight of decisions he does not make. Each morning, he is wrapped in linen so fine it tears when touched. Servants bend in half to fit his sandals to his feet. Attendants smear his joints with black salve laced with opium and honey, medicine that dulls pain but dims his mind. And in the silence of the chamber, where columns rise like prison bars painted with gold, he is dressed for rule, while his body silently decays. Outside, the empire grows restless. Grain shipments from the delta have slowed. Merchants grumble of taxation. There are rumors of Kushite incursions in the south, of Hittites gathering in the north, but the throne does not stir. The general Horemheb makes assurances. The vizier Ai smiles and spreads his hands. The gods, they say, have blessed Egypt with a king of sacred blood. There is nothing to fear, but even the priests cannot ignore what the people begin to whisper. They see the young Pharaoh only from afar now, carried on litters rather than walking, his profile painted in frescoes with lines too clean to be true. Some say he is afflicted, some say cursed, others say he is being hidden, that he no longer speaks, that his sister wife has taken over the court, though she is never seen without a veil, and never speaks in public without another's permission. Ankhesenamun, once the reluctant bride of a god-king, now lives in the deep chambers of the palace, where light comes in filtered through alabaster slats, where voices never rise above whispers, and where prayers are spoken not in hope, but in apology. She still wears the crown. She still attends the ceremonies, but she does so as if moving through water, as if each motion is remembered from an older life, one that ended the moment she first bled in front of the priestesses, the moment she realized that even motherhood would not free her. She is older than him in body, but not in power. She is watched, just as he is watched. Her chambermaids are chosen for their silence. Her meals are tasted by others. Even her letters are read before she sees them. They say it is to protect her. She knows better. And still, the pressure to conceive remains. She is led once more to the temple of Hathor. She is made to lie on the sacred stone, her belly anointed with oils ground from the bones of crocodiles and the feathers of ibis. She is wrapped in linens soaked in river water gathered at dawn. She is whispered to by crones whose teeth are stained from chewing frankincense. They promise her fertility. They promise the gods have not turned away. They promise her that all she must do is open herself again. And so she does. Because what else is there? And once again, her body betrays her. This time, the pregnancy lasts longer. The court allows itself cautious optimism. Horemheb is seen smiling. A commissions a new relief, showing the boy king holding a child beside his queen. Gifts pour in from nobles hoping to curry favor. Offerings are laid in temples. Prayers read aloud to crowds assembled in the courtyard. Egypt believes again. And then the bleeding begins. Not sudden, like before, but slow, relentless. A crimson trail that does not stop. It stains the linens, the floor, her thighs. The midwife's hands tremble. The physicians no longer lie. She is losing the child, and this time, she does not scream. She does not fight. She only closes her eyes and turns her face to the wall, just as she did before, and waits for the silence to come. The child is born dead, a girl, too small, too fragile. Her body shrouded before even the mother can see it, buried in secret beneath the temple floor, a stone placed over her grave that bears no name, only a symbol, the Eye of Horus, chipped at the edge. Tutankhamun does not attend the burial. He is not allowed to. The pain in his legs has worsened. The physicians believe the femur has fractured, without injury, without fall. It simply cracked beneath his own weight. They bring him a crutch, and then another. They try to mold sandals that will support him. They begin preparing a chair for the most important ceremonies. The whispers in the court change from reverence to worry. He is 15, and he is dying. They do not tell him this, not directly, but he feels it in every moment that he wakes with blood in his mouth, in the way his teeth loosen without reason, in the dizziness that drapes itself over his shoulders, like the linen shawls he no longer has the strength to remove. The throne that once felt too large now feels like a sarcophagus waiting for its occupant. He begins to write, slowly, with great pain, a stylus held between fingers that tremble more than they move. He writes not orders but questions, not decrees, but pleas. He asks the gods why his body is broken, why his father left the world in ruin, why his wife weeps in the dark, and why the child he never held must lie in the dirt beneath the temple. He receives no answers, only more ceremony, only more silence. The priests tell him he must visit Karnak again. A sign must be given to the people that Ma'at, the balance of the world, is still maintained, that the Pharaoh is strong, that Amun is pleased. He agrees, though he knows he will not walk. He is lifted into a litter, carved from cedar and gold, draped in white cloth to shield him from the sun. Ankh-Senamun rides behind him. The people cheer as they pass, though their faces are tight with confusion. Some stare too long, others look away. Inside the temple, he is placed upon the golden throne before the great statue of Amun-Ra, the god who was once outlawed by his father and now restored through his name. The priests chant. The air is heavy with incense and heat. Tutankhamun tries to rise. He cannot. His legs give out beneath him. There is a pause in the chant, and in that pause the court realizes the boy king cannot stand. The king of all Egypt cannot rise before his god. A slave boy rushes forward. He offers his shoulder. The priests resume the chant. The general glares. The vizier bows low, too low, as if shielding the scene from the gods themselves. Tutankhamun is lifted again, placed back into the chair, his body shaking, his face carved into stillness through sheer will, and the statue of Amun stares on. Silent, unmoved. The procession ends early. The priests call it an omen fulfilled. The people return to their homes in silence. And the boy, who was once called Tutankhaten, son of the heretic, husband of his sister, god in mortal form, is carried back to his chambers and laid on a bed lined with the furs of lions, whose roars he has never heard. He asks for Ankh-Senamun. She comes to him without question, and for the first time, he does not speak to her as a king to his queen, nor as a brother to a sister, but simply as a boy who is afraid. He asks her to stay. She does. She does not speak. She lays beside him in the dark, her hand in his, and they listen to the sound of the wind moving through the columns outside like a ghost. Neither of them says what they both know, that this will not last much longer, that no child is coming, that no name will follow theirs, that the bloodline that began with gods will end with them. The Nile moves as it always has, slow, deliberate, coiling like a black serpent through the lifeblood of Egypt, carrying with it the silt of centuries and the forgotten bones of men who once believed they were gods. And as it passes Thebes in the hushed hour before sunrise, the palace above it remains cloaked in shadow, its windows shuttered, its halls silent, the heavy curtains drawn not in mourning, but in anticipation, because the king, though still breathing, is closer to death now than life, and everyone in the court knows it, but speaks of it only in metaphors, as if naming the truth might bring the walls of eternity down around them. Tutankhamun has stopped attending council meetings. He no longer walks, no longer rides, no longer stands for the hymns of praise that once declared him Lord of the two lands. And though the official proclamations still bear his seal, pressed gently by trembling fingers into soft clay by the hands of aides whose names will never appear in the records, the real decisions are being made elsewhere, behind the red linen drapes in the chamber of the vizier, in the war tents of Horemheb, in whispered conversations by men who wait with dry eyes and steady hands for the inevitable silence that follows a god's final breath. He has become a shadow in his own palace, a ghost wrapped in linen and perfume, reclining for hours on carved ivory beds he once thought too grand for his child-sized frame, his face drawn tight with pain and fatigue, the bones of his spine grinding against one another with each movement, his mouth perpetually dry, his vision clouded not by age, but by the endless quiet erosion of a body bred too perfectly to survive. His attendants speak to him gently now, not out of love, but out of fear, that any sharpness, any misstep, might unravel what little remains of his fragile equilibrium. They bring him cooling cloths, sweetened dates he cannot chew, bowls of pomegranate juice he cannot hold long enough to lift to his lips. He does not eat. He does not sleep through the night. He speaks less and less. And when he does speak, his voice is smaller, higher, almost boyish again, as if the years of rule have unraveled around him, and he is retreating back into the same silence from which he once emerged, crowned and terrified. too young to understand what was happening, too old now to pretend he doesn't. Beside him, Ankh-Senamun has ceased pretending altogether. Her face, once the painted ideal of queenly beauty, has softened into a mask of weariness. Her kohl no longer perfect, her lips no longer painted to smile. She does not need to smile anymore, because there is no one left in the palace who believes this is a story with a happy ending. She sits with him when no one else does. She brings the letters that arrive from foreign courts, proposals, condolences disguised as treaties, veiled threats dressed as diplomatic courtesy, and reads them aloud with the calm detachment of someone who already knows that none of them matter. No heir has been born. No child has stirred in her belly since the last was buried, and now the boy king lies wrapped in fine linen, his skin pale, his feet too swollen to bear the ceremonial sandals, and the air in the room has grown thick with the scent of cedar and resin, as if the embalmers are already waiting behind the doors, knives polished and cloths folded, ready to begin their sacred work the moment his chest stills. And yet, he breathes. Still, he lingers, like a candle not yet extinguished but already guttering, the flames small, flickering, casting long shadows across the alabaster walls, as if determined to give the court one last moment to make sense of what they've done, to reckon with the truth that the Pharaoh they made, the child they crowned, the god they forced into manhood through ritual and marriage and blood, was never meant to live long enough to rule, and certainly never meant to die like this, alone, childless, and quietly erased. The doctors speak in whispers now. They no longer try to heal. They focus instead on easing pain, on preparing the body, on keeping the limbs supple enough that they won't snap when the death masks are fitted, on ensuring the bones do not crack during the purifications. The court has begun to debate his burial. Some argue for a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, a chamber lined with obsidian and lapis, with gold so heavy it bends under its own grandeur, a resting place that will outshine the heretic father, whose name still carves unease into the priests' throats. Others, quieter, more practical, whisper of smaller plans, of unfinished tombs once meant for noblemen, of chambers that can be painted quickly, sealed quietly, buried before the vultures begin to circle. There is no time for grandeur, there is only time for preservation. The general Horem head prepares, the vizier waits, and Ankh-Senamun, in the dim light of the king's chamber, runs her hand across the boy's damp forehead and listens for breath, still regular, but thinner now, the kind of breath that comes from obligation, not will. He opens his eyes once during the evening, only once, and when he does, she leans close, waiting for something, anything, a name, a word, a request. He only says her name, not my queen, not my sister. Just her name, as if in that final moment, stripped of titles and ritual and expectation, he remembers that before they were pharaoh and consort, before they were forced into the shape of gods, they were children in the same stone palace, climbing the same stairs, walking the same shaded gardens under the same sun, before blood became a burden. She answers with a whisper, and when his eyes close again, she does not call the priests. She does not summon the council. She simply remains at his side, fingers still against his skin, and waits for the stillness to come, not in shock, not in fear, but in the solemn silence of someone who has watched a god die and seen nothing but a boy finally allowed to rest. And when it does come, when the breath stops and the room grows heavy and the silence deepens like a tomb already closing, she rises. She does not cry. There is no time for crying. Only decisions, only war, only history, marching forward like a procession of embalmers with knives hidden beneath their robes, ready to carve the story into flesh and stone and memory. The door to the royal chamber does not creak as it opens because it has been oiled in anticipation. and the sandals of the priests do not echo on the polished floor, because they have walked this path 1,000 times in their minds, preparing for the moment when the line between God and boy dissolves into stillness. And now that it has come, there is no urgency, no alarm, no weeping in the hallways, or collapse of attendants to their knees. Only the slow, rehearsed ceremony of men who have buried kings before and understand that death, when it arrives in palaces, does not scream. It glides in softly, with resin on its breath and gold leaf clinging to its hands. They move quietly around the bed, careful not to disturb the linen folds, not out of reverence, but out of calculation, because the king's body, so young and so brittle, must be preserved before it betrays them with the truth of its condition, before the swelling worsens and the skin begins to loosen and the bruising around his joints reveals how deeply the rot had set in long before his final breath was drawn. Ankhesenamun stands to the side, her arms wrapped around her torso, not as a sign of grief, but to keep herself from trembling, because if she allows even the smallest crack in her composure, the men in this room, the priests, the embalmers, the courtiers who have already begun planning the transition, will smell her weakness like jackals scenting a wounded deer. And she knows, better than anyone, that queens are not allowed to mourn too loudly unless they are being watched. And in this room, behind these drawn curtains, she is not his sister, nor his wife, nor the last survivor of a cursed family. She is only the final obstacle to power. They speak to her gently, as if she might shatter, but their eyes are already measuring the length of the linen, calculating the weight of the body, planning the layout of the tomb, and she understands that Tutankhamun, who once filled these halls with laughter, when he could still walk, when he still believed his crown was something more than a shackle, is already being treated not as a boy who died too young, but as a symbol to be packaged and sealed. A political problem to be solved with incense and stone. The embalming begins almost immediately. They do not wait for omens or stars. They do not pause to allow the heart to be weighed, because the heart, swollen and soft, has already dissolved beneath the layers of infection and fluid that overtook him in those final days. The body is stripped in silence. The incisions are made not with reverence, but efficiency. And when they remove the organs, they find what some had feared and others had whispered. The broken bones, the malformed chest, the spinal abnormalities, the blackened flesh that speaks not of poison, but of inheritance. The legacy of a bloodline so obsessed with purity that it folded in on itself, generation after generation, until the final fruit it bore could not stand beneath the weight of its own name. The embalmers say nothing. They do not need to. They work faster than is customary. There is pressure from the court. The tomb, though prepared in haste, is still not finished, and there are questions about whether it was meant for someone else, a nobleman or a lesser prince, before it was hastily repurposed. But there is no time for grandeur, no time for pyramids or elaborate corridors filled with spells, no time for armies of stone servants or doorways that echo with the names of ancestors. There is only time to seal the story, to bury the evidence, to gild the mask and pray the cracks in the legacy do not show through. The funerary mask, when it is finally placed upon his face, is exquisite. Crafted in blue and gold, with obsidian eyes and lapis brows. A vision of immortality so beautiful that even the priests pause for a moment, as if momentarily seduced by the illusion that the boy beneath it was truly divine. But Ankhesenamun does not pause. She knows what lies beneath the gold. She has seen the swelling. She has smelled the rot. She has washed the skin that blistered and peeled beneath layers of ceremonial paint. She has held the hand that trembled so violently it could no longer sign its own name. And now that it is over, now that the world has begun to whisper of what comes next, she is left with the unbearable silence of a woman who was made a widow not by war or treachery, but by the slow erosion of everything she was forced to love out of duty. She is not invited to speak at the burial. She is not asked for her preferences in the rites. She is not even permitted to witness the sealing of the tomb. Instead, she is given a bowl of pomegranate seeds and told to eat, to strengthen herself, to prepare for what comes next. Because power does not pause for grief, the general waits, the vizier prepares, and within the court, behind veils and whispers, names are already being drawn from scrolls, plans stitched together by men who believe the queen, young and childless, will be grateful for protection. But she's not grateful. She is furious. Not with the men who will try to possess her, but with the gods who demanded this in the first place, who cloaked their cruelty in ritual and their indifference in incense, who allowed a child to be born twisted and still demanded he rule, who allowed a sister to be made a wife and a mother, only to be left with nothing but ghosts and closed doors. In the nights that follow, when the drums of mourning have quieted and the offerings begin to rot in the sun, she walks the palace alone. She touches the throne, still warm from his body. She opens the chest that holds his sandals. She sits on the step where he used to wait for the procession to begin. His staff clutched between fingers that bent the wrong way, his eyes filled not with vision, but with hope. Hope that somehow, despite everything, he might be loved not as a god or a king or a symbol, but simply as himself. And in that moment, she feels the full weight of the empire fall upon her, not in the form of ceremony or expectation, but as a question whispered in the dark. What happens when the story ends before the line does? And what happens to the ones left behind? They come to her not as mourners, but as scavengers cloaked in civility, cloaked in gold-threaded linen and incense-slicked voices, bearing condolences that smell less like grief and more like negotiation. And though her husband's body has barely cooled beneath the layers of linen and resin that hide his brokenness from the world, though the embalmer's chants still echo faintly from the chambers where gods are whispered into flesh, the men who once knelt before Tutankhamun as their divine ruler now stand tall in her presence, not because they forget the king who died too young, but because they remember that the crown did not die with him, and that the only path to its power still runs through the girl who was turned into a queen by birth, a sister by duty, and a wife by decree. They speak her name with reverence, as if it still belongs to her, as if it wasn't carved into the stone walls of a tomb she can no longer bear to enter. And when the Vizier A approaches, his spine still upright despite the decades he carries, his fingers adorned with rings that glint like warnings, he reminds her not of love, but of legacy, invoking her father's memory with the polished ease of a man who has served too many kings to grieve the fall of one, offering his wisdom, his experience, his protection, not as a gift, but as a transaction, as if by marrying the last royal daughter, he might not only sanctify his ascent to the throne, but retroactively cleanse the path that brought him here through smoke, silence, and the timely disappearance of rivals. She does not answer him immediately, and when he bows and retreats with a practiced smile, the general Horemheb follows, not with flowers or poetry, but with the bluntness of a soldier who has bled on battlefields the boy king never lived long enough to see, who speaks not of dynastic purity or divine inheritance, but of necessity and stability, of border threats and military unrest, and who offers himself not as a husband but as a shield, hard, unquestioning and absolute, believing, perhaps foolishly, that a woman surrounded by priests and courtiers might choose steel over incense if given the chance to survive. But Ankhesenamun listens to neither promise with trust, for both men are relics of a system that consumed her brother-husband before his voice had even deepened. And though they come with veiled flattery and cloaked threats, What they want is no different than what was taken from her before. Her name, her future, her body, her will, because to marry her now is not to love her, nor even to claim her, but to seize control of a throne that cannot rest empty without inviting war. And in this moment of widowhood, she is no freer than she was as a girl being dressed in gold and led into the bedchamber of a boy who wept when no one was watching. So she waits, not passively, but deliberately, her silence a resistance more potent than protest. And in that silence, she writes, not in the elegant ceremonial hieroglyphs that adorn the walls of dead kings, but in the language of diplomacy and danger. Akkadian, the script of foreign courts, the tongue of enemies and allies alike. And her letter is addressed not to a priest or a council or a general, but to the king of the Hittites, the very empire Egypt has long considered its rival, its mirror, its threat. And in that letter she does something unprecedented, unthinkable. She asks for a prince, not for love, not for desire, but for power, real power, not born of incestuous bloodlines or cloistered inheritance, but forged through alliance, through difference, through the deliberate shattering of the cycle that turned children into rulers and sisters into wives, offering the throne of Egypt not as a prize to be inherited, but as a piece to be earned, as if by reaching beyond the Nile's borders, she might rewrite not only her own fate, but the very terms of dynastic survival. And for a moment, it seems she might succeed. The Hittite king, intrigued and cautious, responds not with war, but with assent, sending a son, not the crown prince, but a royal nonetheless, southward under the protection of diplomats and guards. A gesture not only of cooperation, but of historic reconciliation. A symbol of what might come if power could be shared rather than stolen, if borders could be bridged by marriage rather than crossed by sword. But Egypt does not forget. Egypt does not forgive. And Egypt does not change. Before the prince can reach the capital, before the union can be sealed, before the revolution of queenship can take its breath, the caravan is attacked, perhaps by raiders, perhaps by loyalists to Ai or agents of Horemheb, perhaps even by those who see a foreign prince as a desecration of everything divine. But no matter who strikes the fatal blow, the result is the same. The prince is killed, his body discarded before his name can be remembered, his journey ended before it can be recorded, and the message is clear. Egypt belongs to Egypt, and the queen belongs to the past. The court blames the desert, the dangers of travel, the gods themselves. No one is punished, no one confesses, and no one dares acknowledge that a queen, in trying to save her bloodline, has only ensured that it ends. Surrounded by silence and surrounded by men who now move more quickly, more confidently, more hungrily, Ankhesenamun is left with no illusions, no foreign rescue, no new dynasty, no escape through diplomacy or divine intervention. Only the two offers that have waited since her husband's final breath, and in the face of inevitability, she chooses the lesser of two indignities, not out of surrender, but because survival, for women in palaces, is measured not in victories, but in losses delayed. She marries A, her grandfather, her cousin, the man who once served her father and now claims her as his queen, not to honor her, but to sanctify his own reign, to whitewash the memory of a bloodline collapsing into itself with one final desperate thread of continuity. There is no celebration, only ritual, only incense and vows spoken without feeling, repeated not for her, but for the gods, the court, the tomb walls that will one day tell the story not of a girl who lived, but of a queen who served, a body through which empire passed on its way to war. She wears the crown again, and though it gleams as it did before, Though the diadem still rests along her brow with the same pressure, it feels heavier now, not because her neck is weaker, but because she knows, with the certainty of someone who has watched death more than once, that there is no one left in this palace who sees her as anything more than the final mask that must be worn before the curtain falls. In the final months of Ai's rule, the court had already begun to forget the boy king who had preceded him. Tutankhamun's name was no longer spoken in council meetings, and his legacy, once painted in gold and guarded by priests, was quickly becoming an inconvenience to those who wished to reshape Egypt's political memory into something more convenient, more stable, more useful. The tomb that had received him had not been built for a pharaoh, and everyone knew it. It was too small, too plain, too quickly finished. The chambers lacked the sprawling grandeur of his ancestors' resting places, and though the gold within shone brightly, it was a tomb of necessity, not reverence. Yet in some twisted way, it was the most honest part of his entire reign, a last-minute burial for a last-minute king. Ankhesenamun, now the wife of Ai, faded quietly into the fabric of history as well. There are no records of her producing an heir, and her name appears less and less in inscriptions after her marriage. What was once a line of royal women stretching back through centuries of myth and blood had now dwindled to a single branch, and that branch had been bent to serve a dynasty desperately trying to prove it still had a roots. Her life, so central to the crown's survival, became politically inconvenient the moment her usefulness ended. She had no throne of her own, no army behind her, no surviving children to immortalize her image. She simply vanished, from records, from monuments, and eventually from memory. What makes her disappearance so haunting is not just the absence of a tomb or an inscription, but the way in which history allowed it. The 18th dynasty had turned itself into a mythos so entangled with divinity that it refused to acknowledge its own humanity. It could glorify queens as goddesses, as mothers of kings, as wives of the divine, but it could not reconcile a woman who had been sister to a god, wife to a broken boy, and prisoner to a collapsing empire. She did not die in ceremony, and she was not deified in death. She was simply erased. Meanwhile, Egypt's throne passed from priest to general to foreign-born kings. Horemheb, once a loyalist to the crown, eventually took power by force. His rule would mark the start of a new era, one that would undo much of what the Amarna kings had built. Temples to Aten were torn down, names were scratched from walls, and pharaohs deemed heretical were removed from king lists as if they had never existed. The sands covered what remained of their stories, and for over 3,000 years, the memory of Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun lay buried beneath layers of both earth and deliberate silence. It wasn't until 1922, when Howard Carter broke through the seal of a small forgotten tomb in the Valley of the Kings, that the world was finally forced to remember. The tomb of Tutankhamun, despite its humble architecture, was nearly untouched, a miracle of circumstance. And inside that cramped space, painted in stars and sacred texts, lay the boy who had once been a god, preserved under layers of gold, oil, linen, and secrecy. His death mask became one of the most famous objects in history. His name, once erased from the record, became known in every language on earth. His treasures filled museums, his likeness adorned books and documentaries, his image was cast into the future like a beacon pulled from the past. But Ankhesenamun was not there. Her body was never found. Her tomb, if it exists, has never been uncovered. All we have are fragments, a ring bearing her name, a letter to a foreign king, a mention in temple reliefs that were later defaced. She, who had been the final vessel of a collapsing dynasty, was reduced to little more than a footnote in her husband's posthumous fame. And perhaps that is the most tragic part of all, that the girl who had been forced to marry her brother to serve as queen beside a child who could not walk, to watch him die before she reached adulthood, is now known only by her proximity to a boy who was broken long before he wore the crown. When we look at Tutankhamun today, we see a king, a child, a marvel frozen in gold. But what we should see is a warning of what happens when bloodlines are mistaken for divinity, when power is passed like a curse through children too young to carry it, when families turn inward until all that remains is a silence too deep to measure. And when we remember Ankhesenamun, if we remember her at all, we should not remember her only as queen or sister or wife, but as a girl whose life was carved into a shape she never chose, whose voice was buried long before her body, and who deserved a world that would see her not as a symbol, but as a person. Because empires do not fall with flames or war cries alone. Sometimes they fall with the quiet death of a child and the silence that follows.